Okay, well, today I'm joined by Christian Hacking from the Council for Bioethical Reform. Now, on YouTube, just recently, I saw a video by Christian where he was discussing pro-life issues, abortion issues in Scotland. It was really fascinating. And it was really encouraging that someone outside Scotland has taken the time to look at what's going on here. So welcome, Christian. It's great to have you here today. Really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say. So you've been looking at this issue in Scotland. What have you found?
Well, I have. So, the Scots are very special. They're very special people. I'm sad that you think so little of yourself that anyone would want to research things going on in your part of the world. But what triggered this was, so we're from the Centre for Bioethical Reform. We're an organisation that seeks to educate on the reality of the humanity of the unborn child and the reality of abortion. And so, we keep a beady eye on abortion statistics, and I think it was last week, the 2019 Scottish abortion statistics came out. And so in my weekly news update, I decided to kind of focus on that, and I'm delighted, Scottish people found it helpful. So, but I mean, the statistics themselves are probably worth looking at. So the 2019 statistics show that there were 13,583 unborn children killed by abortion in Scotland last year. That's actually the highest total you guys have had since 2008. It's an increase of 297 from last year. It's worth noting that 52% of those will be women in the 20 to 30 category. 35% with those women in their 30s, and finally, you had a record number of abortions for women in the plus 40 category, which is always a surprise, simply because women in their 40s should, as far as trajectory goes, be in a more stable place emotionally, and financially and otherwise. So some of those justifications, I mean, you certainly wouldn't get a 40-year-old woman saying, I needed to continue my education. So when you've got abortions in the plus 40 category, it is indicative of something quite deep culturally, that people are choosing to go for an abortion when potentially there could be provision around for them. A small subset of those would be diagnoses of kind of Down syndrome, which has a higher prevalence later on in life. But that would be a small percentage, simply because of all the abortions, of the 13,500 that you had, 211 were on children with disabilities. So we can assume that a number of those most of those 40-year-olds, there wasn't necessarily a diagnosis. 34% were repeat abortions. That's a figure slightly lower than in the UK. Or is it 30? It may be, it's either low or the same as in the UK, and then also the great majority being medical abortions. So abortions through the taking of 2 sets of pills. The first one effectively kills the unborn child, or makes an environment in which that unborn child can't survive, and the second one induces what abortion providers refer to as a heavy period, although what many women who take the pill describe as basically labor pains, and it expels the child from the mother. The child is worth noting. So here's some amazing images of human development, of 8 weeks, an 8-week-old embryo and a 9-week-old fetus. These images were used with the same technology they used to kind of make, I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of the Earth from NASA, the kind of whole globe. So what many people don't realize is that wasn't one image, because in order to get that resolution of the Earth, you have to take a series of images which are stitched together. And so the 2 images here have used that same technology. So there are multiple images of a developing embryo and fetus from the moment of fertilization, that have been stitched together to make these, some of the most detailed images we have of, human life in its earlier stages. now most of these pregnancies, most women don't know they're pregnant until 6 weeks. So we can assume that most of these children will be aborted in the 6 to 8 week bracket. At which point, their heart's beating. They've got brainwaves at 6 weeks. Hands, fingers, etc. are moving. The manual for home abortion in the UK, downplays the humanity of the unborn child. It doesn't refer to it as a child at all. It says it's kind of pregnancy tissue, and says you're very unlikely to see it at 9 weeks. The issue being that in Scotland, the limit is actually 12 weeks, in which your child is highly likely to not only be seen, but very distinguishable. At which point it recommends, to either flush them down the toilet or to wrap them in a piece of tissue and dispose of them in a bin. The same fate we would tend to give a pet goldfish.
So can you clarify the difference between Scotland and the rest of the UK on that point?
At the start of lockdown, we had the biggest changes to abortion measures since 1967, which was without a vote in Parliament, they basically just suddenly decided to bring in what they call kind of telemed abortions, so abortions at home in which women can take both pills at home. What in effect is DIY home abortions. And whereas the UK has whereas England and Wales have set a cap of 10 weeks on home abortion, Scotland have said that women can receive these pills and take these pills up to 12 weeks gestation. Now that's in theory. These women are not required legally to come into a clinic, so there's no proof of gestational age through ultrasound as you would if you were having an in clinic abortion. So basically, all women really need to give is their name, the address of a local GP practice, and their last menstrual period in order to get an abortion. And the abortion provider has to assume that last menstrual period is an accurate one. Unfortunately, we know already that, for a cacophony of different reasons, women are not giving their accurate last menstrual period and are delivering children at 18, 20. And there's even one, it's a murder investigation going on in the UK for a child born at plus 30 weeks who was still alive when they were born. This is this lunacy of the current DIY home abortion measures, brought in on the back of this, the messaging, stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. Whereas actually the reality of these pills is, because the complication rate is 4-fold higher for surgical abortion, for so many women, they're going to get complications, they're going to get infections, they're going to need to go to hospital. And even if it's a successful abortion procedure, well, you can hardly say it's saving lives. It's killing an unborn life, and it's reaping trauma and on the mother who's taking these pills. So, it's a total farce to think that this was introduced as, a benevolent response to COVID, helping women in a crisis. This was always the plan of the abortion industry, to get abortions out of the clinics and into people's homes, and they've just used COVID to fast track that process. And unsuspecting and misinformed women are reaping the consequences as we speak.
Was there much opposition to that?
No, so in Parliament, none at all. It wasn't even put up to vote. It was basically some high calls made from the abortion industry to their lobbyists in Parliament to put pressure on Matt Hancock, who changed the legislation, not knowing any better. And now, you've got women presenting in A&E departments up and down the country. I heard one story from, I think it was Fife, I'll need to get the exact. Yeah, so there we go. Forth Valley Hospital. So in June, a woman presented at Forth Valley Hospital, having obtained these pills at 11 weeks, and then she ummed and ahed until her 19th week. So she took the pills in her 19th week, and she delivered the baby at 20 weeks, and right. Presented at that hospital, with the signs of trauma, totally unexpecting what was happening to her. So, we're talking about huge changes that were informed by the abortion industry and their allies in regulation, and not with due regard to the unborn child or to the people who are actually really going to be taking these pills. And I mean that their response, that there was an organization in the UK called Christian Concern took the government to task over the introduction of DIY home abortions. During that legal proceedings, and a leaked email was given as evidence from NHS Improvements and NHS England, and it was sent to it was either sent from or to midwives, detailing 13 serious incidences caused by DIY home abortion pills, including 2 maternal deaths, resuscitations, hemorrhages, and, as I've said, women delivering babies long past the gestational cutoff. But what this is always followed with is a total kind of, compared to the number of abortions we've done, which at the time was 16,000, this is a phenomenally small number. Let's not get caught up in those small cases, those tragic examples, because the whole thing is so needed and, good for mothers. So it's kind of the question really for policymakers is, will they pay heed of the small voice and just the ever increasing number of mothers? So that's the thing. So Scotland's got a. So you're going to ask a question? Go for it.
I was just saying, would you anticipate that whenever this sort of coronavirus legislation is rolled back, that there'll be an attempt to leave that as it is?
Yeah, well, we're already seeing it. So from the moment they brought in these DIY measures, the abortion industry were publishing, stories in the papers of women who took these pills, had an incredibly smooth experience, nothing like as bad as what they thought. It was incredibly easy, and with the odd comment on the end, why wouldn't we keep this on? And so the UK, who when these new measures were brought in, they were brought in as a temporary measure, not in the Corona Act. They got bounced from that, but kind of as a kind of Department of Health change afterwards. It was brought in as a temporary one, and yet now the UK government today announced that they're going to have a parliamentary review on this to see whether they're going to keep it permanent. So the goalposts keep changing. But this is very much, it's always going. You can look at sources from that the abortion industry have produced, going back 2017, before COVID. It has always been their desire to get abortion into people's homes because it gets it away from the clinic, it gets it as early as possible, and it doesn't mean, that it prevents all the other complications of trying to find doctors to perform abortions at plus 12, 13 weeks, of which very few really want to do because it's a horrendous procedure that involves kind of crushing a human being, and they know it. So so this is kind of this, it's been part of their practice forever, and yes, they are most certainly going to push for it to be a permanent fixture moving forward.
Right. Okay.
Well, the third thing I was going to talk about. So I mean, the pills by post inevitably, and I do want to show your viewers a graphic image right now. But this is a depiction of what women up and down the country will see having taken that second set of pills at 8 weeks, 9, 10, 11 weeks. They'll be confronted with a very little dead baby, and that baby in the majority of cases will then be flushed down the toilet and join our sewage system. So as a society, we live in this peculiar time where there's government campaigns to prevent us from flushing wet wipes down the toilet because they are not biodegradable. But your own children, well, that's another story. And with these new legislation, it raises this whole conundrum of, well, where can this happen? What if a woman takes the pills and it's on a long train journey? In a train toilet, or what if a woman gets called into work last minute and then ends up aborting in her home toilet, in her work toilet? I mean, there's no end to where this can go, and it's defiling of us as a society if we're to treat human beings like feces, and to give them the same fate. So I mean, aside from that,
it's interesting today. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon was having like a Twitter exchange with Hamza Yousaf, the Justice Secretary, and they're both talking about experiences of miscarriages. They're talking about it very sensitively and seriously, but completely failing to just follow the logic that what they're doing is sort of deliberately ending the life of unborn children on a sort of industrial scale. They don't have any qualms about that at all. And yet when it comes down to their individual circumstances, they can see the true impact of it, that they can understand it then. I mean, how people can not connect those things together, I don't know. It's
it's cultural schizophrenia, you know. Either a child is a human being and matters, at which point it's a sad loss whenever they die, or it's a clump of cells, it's a product of conception, and it has no value. And you know, we should tell all the women struggling with a miscarriage to, you know, buck up and, you know, get over it.
Yeah.
But of course we don't because there's something we've come to believe that as mothers and as a society we can ascribe value depending on how wanted something is.
Yeah. It's founded on emotion, isn't it? They think that the tragedy of a miscarriage is that the couple were really looking forward to having a baby and they really wanted one, so they're really disappointed and upset. And that's really the significant thing, rather than anything objective about it. And that's I've talked about this before in Scottish politics. So much of it is founded on sort of empathizing and emotion, rather than actually any sort of rational assessment, objective assessment of the issues involved. I mean, that's a classic case. So, I mean, I would imagine it could be foreseeable in the future if we were to use some images in campaigning, such as you've shown. I could well imagine that some, like you said, people would object that it was insensitive on the grounds they've had a miscarriage or whatever. But if politicians who are pushing abortion and promoting abortion vigorously also then object on the grounds that they've had a miscarriage, well, I think that would start a very interesting conversation.
Well, I mean, and that's exactly why these images have been developed, because we are dealing with a society that is post-fact and all feeling, and so in any strategy to educate on abortion, you have to be savvy to this. You have to be savvy to this reality, and you have to confront people with facts that also hit feelings. Because unless people are confronted with both, then it won't make sense to the current political lens in which we seem to kind of work. So yeah, you're quite right. You know, in America, where these images have been far better tried and tested, you know, they've put politicians next to the reality of abortion in swing states, and they've seen last minute swings in voting patterns, you know, because people are just thinking, hang on, you know, and you know, forcing politicians to not only justify their own policies, you know, and abortion, when it's couched in euphemisms, looks very palatable in black and white, you know. But when the euphemisms are stripped out, especially through use of imagery, you know, there's nothing, you can't justify it. It's morally unjustifiable. And it's very important that politicians should be made to answer to that. But
at the moment we've got, so the Greens and the Lib Dems, their policy is full decriminalisation of abortion. So that's abortion up to full term. I mean, Labour, that's now the Labour policy as well, isn't it? It was at the last election, UK wide. And the SNP government pay quite a few organisations who campaign for abortion up to full term, feminist organisations, like Scottish Women's Aid, etc. And that's seen as a perfectly respectable point of view. But imagine that the people who promote that point of view, they don't have the slightest fear that this might backfire on them in some way or might embarrass them.
Well, but also decrim is a euphemism, right? So the whole decrim campaign is basically sold as, we've got these Victorian laws that could potentially, although they're never really used, send poor mothers who have access to abortion to jail, for doing something that in the rest of the UK is safe and legal, right?
Yeah.
Decrim has never been about these mothers accessing abortion. It's always been about the interests of the abortion industry to operate without the kind of severe scrutiny of criminal law. The abortion industry are desperate to get themselves out of criminal law and to put themselves into some medical framework in which the scope of their provision will be far wider. And, you know, if they make a mishap, well, no one's going to go to jail, because the worst we're going to get is a £5,000 fine. That's exactly what's happened in Northern Ireland. We mustn't, our voters mustn't be deceived that this, you know, this is not about the best interests of mothers. This is an ideological charged campaign to ensure that the borders of the abortion industry are safe from legal scrutiny. And because I think the clock is ticking against them, because I think the truth is slowly coming out, I think they're desperately trying to push this to get this into law, or to get themselves out of criminal law as soon as possible, because they know their time is nigh. And they're looking over to the States, where, you know, huge exposure work has happened on the abortion industry, and the abortion industry has come under huge amounts of pressure, and rightfully so, because of the harm it's causing. So I mean, the decrim stuff will really bite politicians when politicians are made when it's revealed and made entirely clear that this is not about decrim. I mean, take for example the recent vote in the UK. It was on a domestic abuse vote that the abortion industry tried to bring in measures to decriminalize abortion. Okay. And politicians were rightly smelling a fish, because they were saying, surely if someone is in an abusive situation, they need more professionals, social workers, GPs into that equation. And what you're suggesting right now is we should actually have less people and just a telemed consultation. And lo and behold, Diana Johnson withdrew the amendment before it even got to vote, you know, presumably because she realized they were going to lose, and they were going to lose bad. But it just goes to show, you know, how much do they really care for women if they're trying to, you know, if they're trying to bring in less safeguards and less support in a domestic abuse bill. So yes, I mean, all of this is going to backfire at some point. The question's when. And because the other thing that many mainline political parties in Scotland and the UK have also signed up for is arbitrary, you know, buffer zones around clinics. Which again, you know, is a total affront, you know, not only to libertarian thought, but also plays, you know, again, you know, it's not okay, they say, to harass women trying to access safe and legal healthcare, right? But what if the reality is, you know, they don't like people raising gently or prayerfully a conscientious objection to what they're doing? Because when people are outside clinics, that affects business. You know, to use a very blunt metaphor, it hardens the meat before slaughter. It conflicts patients visiting the clinic, you know, that maybe what they're doing is not the right thing. And so clinics are kind of having to deal with disgruntled, upset, you know, conscientiously muddled people, which isn't what they want. So they've created a campaign that is meant to be women focused. It's actually industrial focused, you know, and everyone's bought it. So the reworking of this is to help people see what's going on. It's to get truth to the very bottom, and to take the focus off where they want it to be, and put the focus exactly where it needs to be, which is what is abortion and what is it doing to unborn children and to those who take those pills. You're
saying about the sort of abortion industry being a force behind a lot of this. I mean, in Scotland, it appears to me as if a huge amount, certainly publicly, a lot of the push in the direction of liberalisation of abortion, promotion of abortion, is from feminist organisations. I mean, for example, the Scottish government funds an organisation called Close the Gap. They're trying, you know, closing the gender pay gap. A part of their rationale as well, you know, if women are going to have these their careers unhindered and going to earn as much as men, then you know, we need to decriminalise abortion to make sure that they can get on with their careers, no matter what point they change their mind during a pregnancy. And that's the sort of line you hear coming through. I think in Scotland there are much more of these government-funded bodies, and they're very powerful. And I would say they're it appears to me, in any case, that they seem to be the main driving force behind the push for abortion liberalization. Yeah, there's maybe not so much of that in England.
Well, I mean, but you mustn't, you know. Of course, the lobbying players are going to be different in different regions, but ultimately, when you've got a service up and running, you know, be it in Scotland with Sandyford or Brooke or whoever's providing your provision, at some point, you know, they're going to be prescribing these pills, and your health service is going to be being sent a bill, you know. And if it's a surgical abortion, if it's a later abortion, they get more money. And so, you know, whilst people, you know, so much of this stuff, you know, they're non-for-profit and there's charitable sectors and there's kind of, you know, community pressure groups. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is a paid service, and these services are not willing to help these mothers out with childcare. They're not willing to hold their hand through the emotional turmoil of the next, you know, decade or 20 years. They're not willing to help them out with their rent or really, you know, put in the measures to ensure that, you know, if they're in an abusive situation, they are removed immediately. You know, it's a short-term, short-sighted fix. You know, that seems to make sense, but really, it's, you know, long term, it's not in the best interest of anyone. And I think exposing, you know, where our money's going and showing people the streams, the financial streams in abortion is vital for people to understand, you know, bottom lines. But I mean, although I have done a bit of research, I mean, I haven't bottomed out the Scottish system and the Scottish abortion industry at all. So I hope somebody watching this could maybe fill me in or go away and do a kind of PhD in it and send me their paper, because it all needs to be exposed.
Yeah. Right. Over to someone. Let us know.
Over to someone, please. But I think one of the things I really wanted to draw out in this interview is just the roots of abortion. So that there's a slide that I've produced, and it's a quote from Mary Stopes, who was a British scientist and eugenicist, who went on to found was Mary Stopes in the UK and also Mary Stopes International, which provide a huge number of abortions, medical and otherwise, around the world. But it's fundamental for people to understand, you know, the roots of the abortion industry in order to understand how to fight it. So in her book from the 1920s, Radiant Motherhood, she states, a second and almost greater danger is not simple ignorance, but the inborn incapacity which lies in the vast and ever-increasing stock of degenerates, feeble-minded and unbalanced, who are now in the midst and who devastate social customs. These populate most rapidly. These tend proportionately to increase, and these, like the parasite upon a healthy tree, sapping its vitality. Now, sorry, I haven't quoted that totally perfectly there, but really, the roots of abortion for Mary Stopes was eugenics. It was a means to stop the parasitical poor from getting too big, and although the language has changed in the way abortion providers describe their procedures, and although the responsibility is shifted from a kind of, you know, we're doing this to you, women, as opposed to women kind of what they claim is taking responsibility for their own bodies, this same stuff is still going on, and I want to argue in a moment that it's going on most prevalently. And it's easiest to prove that this stuff is going on in Scotland. So when it comes to language, you know, we see so many words being kind of euphemized in order to achieve this. So killing a baby has become ending a pregnancy. The baby is regarded as a fetus, pregnancy tissue, clump of cells. The exploiting of a body, which is how Alice Poole, one of the early feminists, describes abortion, is now referred to as taking control of one's own body. Abortion, which is a very painful procedure, is described by abortion providers as treatment. Abortion, which I want to argue in a moment, is disempowering communities, is actually sold as empowering individuals. And as mentioned earlier, saving lives outside of clinics. So trying to persuade, women to keep their babies outside of clinics is seen as harassing women attempting to access, safe legal healthcare. So there's this constant reframing in language that has occurred in the last kind of 50 years, constantly concealing the full truth. But the real point I want to come on to is, abortion is being used as a social engineering exercise to basically limit the number of poor and complex people in your community. So if you look at the Scottish abortion stats from 2019 and you scroll down to figure 6, termination rates in Scotland by deprivation area 2010 to 2019, surprise, surprise, abortion happens most of all in the most deprived areas, right? So it's about 9 people per 1,000 in wealthy areas. It doubles to 16 or up to 18 people per 1,000 in the most deprived areas, and more so. In recent years, Scotland have been trialling NHS Lothian, and this is also in a slide. I've got the original fact sheet for that. NHS Lothian have been pursuing what's called ultra early medical abortions. So it's an abortion before the yolk sac has been formed. So the idea here is, all you need is a pregnancy test that's positive, and then we'll provide you with the abortion medication. So it's, the idea is getting rid of the problem before it has even started. But it not only shows a total disregard for life, but it also means, some of these women are going to be taking these very potent pills with high levels of side effects and complications, potentially not even having a baby inside them. And again, it just shows the prioritizing of population over the prioritizing of the person that is in front of you. I mean, why would you would never want anyone to take these pills. I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to take these pills under any circumstance. But even if you're a conscientious pro-choice scientist, you shouldn't want people to take these pills unless you are absolutely certain, that there was a need to take them. Because, if they're working, you're feeling sick and you're vomiting and you're in excruciating pain, and you can go on to bleed for 3 weeks afterwards, although many women report more. And this is the point I really want to make, that the science on abortion, much denied by the abortion industry, makes for very compelling and dire reading. Okay, so the science from, to quote a few studies, from Coleman in 2011 and Ferguson in 2013, I can give you the links to these studies if you want to include them in the video description, shows that anxiety increases between 28% and 60% from people who've had abortion. Depression increases by 53%. Self-harm can increase from 69 to 396%. Substance abuse increases from 291 to 644% from one abortion. Alcoholism also increases from 134% to 149%. There's even one study that suggests that women are 6 times more likely to die the year after they've had one abortion, right? That's either by suicide, road traffic accident, health condition, or an abusive relationship that has got worse through them deciding to abort that child. I mean, this is stuff, if you read the abortion literature that you get with these DIY abortion pills, they probably go as far to say is you will feel a mixture of emotions after taking these pills. But what you've got here is you've got pills that are being used to try to, help poverty, that are just compounding and worsening the situation and just making it even harder for people to climb out of poverty. And I'm fearful, that actually this stuff is being trialed in some of the most deprived communities in Scotland, and far from empowering people, is actually disempowering them.
So this is unique to Scotland.
Well, my theory here is, I mean, I've sat in a number of abortion conferences, and I get the distinct impression that I think the ultra early early medical abortions, I think was trialed solely in Scotland. I get the impression that some of this, when it comes to early medical abortion, the Scottish regime is more, liberal. I think because, deprivation in Scotland in places is incredibly high. So I think, Scottish policymakers, wittingly or unwittingly, have said yes to far more than they realize. And of course, if they're being told that, this is just like a heavy period, that there's no long-term health consequences to this, just a period of mixed feeling, why wouldn't they, with the evidence they're being provided? But what's coming through is, if you do deeper study and wider study, especially from countries that wouldn't benefit from, criticizing abortion, you start to see a very different picture. I mean, one of the disputed topics is abortion and breast cancer. Abortion providers that will jump upon you to say that, there is absolutely no link. That's what their paperwork says. But there's a study, which I hope you will include in this. It's in one of the slides, from 2020, right? It reviewed 76 studies from around the world. Okay, so Chinese countries, Asian countries, Finland and other places, totally around the world, right? 76 studies it assessed. 61 out of 76 showed a positive correlation between abortion and breast cancer, right? So not only do we have, potent drugs killing children, traumatizing the poor, not only do we have, all the knock-on consequences of, mental health issues, substance abuse afterwards, not only do we have an increased risk of women dying, which presumably may leave mourning partners or children without parents, but then you've got, if you survive all of that, there may be an increased chance that, you're going to be filling up, the cancer clinics because of early onset breast cancer. I mean, again, as I said, this is totally short-sighted. Long term, we're doing a huge amount of damage here. And yet, in the UK, and I don't think this is a coincidence, women don't have to give their NHS number before they access abortion, which means, hey, we don't have any longitudinal data on this. But the most winnable legal battle or political battle for any political party fighting abortion is just to say, let's get NHS numbers attached to every abortion procedure, just so we can prove some things or disprove some things. Surely, I mean,
in Scotland, there's so many areas in Scotland where the research and statistics that we would like to have to see the effect of, different family setups or whatever, lots of things. In Scotland, just the research doesn't exist. Probably because then the universities, just everything in Scotland, we call it the blob. There's just groupthink everywhere. And for a lot of these sorts of research, it needs someone with the motivation to think, right, this is something I'm going to find out about. As soon as the groupthink gets too extensive, no one bothers to find out about the things that would be inconvenient truths. Quite often in Scotland, that the data that we would really like doesn't exist. So we're having to say, look, these are countries where people have actually made the effort to research these things, and these are the consequences. And we assume it would be the same in Scotland if anyone bothered to actually look into it.
Well, I think you're totally right. There should be, unless you've got an ideological presupposition to something, there should be no reason why you wouldn't expose whatever you're doing to, impartial scientific analysis over a decade or 20 years. And I think the fact that doesn't happen is telling of where people's priorities are really at. I don't think this is data driven. I think this is ideologically driven. I think this is, this is the horrendous consequence of the sexual revolution in the 60s. And, it's a bloody mopping up of what's going on. And hey, we don't want to put stats on it because freedom is the best, right?
Yeah.
And I think
within the Scottish Parliament, even when there is a range of data, there's other material to bring in. Generally, the MSPs, their diet is just being fed by these campaigning groups, mainly government-funded campaigning groups. So they live in the bubble where all they get is just the drip feed of, in this case, pro-abortion material. But there's the same in other topics as well. So unless they're very independently minded and they take the initiative to independently find other sources of information. They just sort of swim in this soup of this liberal, progressive, it's a parallel universe. And find the longer they spend in it, the more soaked in it they become, and the less able they are to see other opinions.
Yeah. Well,
compared to the Scottish Parliament, the Westminster Parliament is full of diversity of thought and original viewpoints.
Well, I think that's generous. I think that's generous, but I think I think there are a few people in there, but I think when you look at when you cross-analyze, these groups and who's leading them and who's in charge of them, there's a kind of ancestral nature to a lot of it, especially on particular issues like abortion, and it needs to be expanded. You need to bring in. It needs huge overhaul, and I think. But the question is, how do you create that deep desire and motivation to even bring about that change? And this brings me back to what we think to be central to campaigning and educating on abortion. Is basically to expose, to show people where that liberal soup is going, who is suffering most as a result to that liberal soup, and may these facts that hit your feelings and your emotions help to kind of give you that strong coffee you need, to kind of wake up from it all. And so that's why the solution is for me is not only to understand what's going on, not only to use correct language, but to expose. So to expose the humanity of the unborn child, to visit our website CBR UK to see what the reality of abortion looks like, and also to expose the players, pushing this, and you know a great deal more than me, Richard, about these groups and how they're operating. It's to really name them, call them out, help people to see who's responsible, who's pushing them, what degrees they're studying, hold their names and their facts against science, see how it all aligns. It's that kind of that stuff in the UK that it's not British, that kind of the world has suffered too much from investigative reports that end up removing the names at the last minute. If you care more about the victim than you do about the people in power, then you don't mind keeping the names in, because what matters is directing people to the problem, and so the problem can be solved. And so that would be mine: expose the humanity, expose the reality, and expose the players. And also, one of my huge takeaways for you guys is make this a primary voting issue. You have to believe that there's enough people out there deeply wounded by abortion, not just the mothers, the fathers too, people who wanted to have a baby, but their local health provider thought they were a bit dysfunctional, so they strongly encouraged their partner to have an abortion. They're wounding, they're hurting. For somebody to stand up and say, what, you guys have been sold an absolute lie that has reaped untold trauma on you guys for decades. We as a party are not going to stand for it. We may be a small voice, but we're going to really make a case on your behalf, because we believe we believe this is hurting you. We believe that this is holding you back from your potential. I think that was essential to seeing change.
They're good lines. But opposition to abortion in Scotland runs at about sort of 10 or 15% of the population, which is more than enough. If all those people voted for the Scottish Family Party, then we'd get MSPs into the Scottish Parliament. So for us as a small party, so for a big party, if you're, say, running the Conservatives, it doesn't make any sort of electoral sense to try and appeal to 15%, because for them, it's not going to increase their vote. They'd be doing the right thing, but it's not going to increase their vote. So even if they did believe that, even if they were pro-life, their strategists would say, look, we need to back off this. But it's only going to change on the grand scale when public opinion shifts, isn't it? That's going to be the ultimate target. Yeah. But the question is, how's that going to happen? It's not going to happen by having sort of a few politicians who, every now and again when a vote comes up, vote the right way. That's just, that's just a number. But if you look at people talk about William Wilberforce being the example of someone who worked from the inside in a mainstream party and got something changed. But if you look at what he didn't just sit there in the Parliament and just whenever a slavery vote happened to come up, he just voted the right way. He was absolutely at the forefront of campaigning. It was his dominant issue, and he pushed that at every possible opportunity. Now, if a modern politician was like that on pro-life issues, basically they wouldn't survive in any of the mainstream parties. They wouldn't have them. They wouldn't get through the selection procedure. Or if they did get through and they tried to be that sort of prominent, like single issue campaigner, pro-life, the parties wouldn't put up with it. Whereas in Scotland, smaller parties have got a chance. So if we can just put it on the agenda and start the debate, once the debate happens, I mean, the pro-life case is so, as you've been laid out, is so clear and logical and powerful that if people hear it, people will be won over to it. So
right.
just
I quite agree.
The context people can hear it is through the political system. So if we had pro-life MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, their importance isn't the next vote on abortion. There'd be a few more votes against it. The important thing would be they would be putting it on the agenda, and there'd be people taking the initiative with it. So it'd be shifting public debate, opening up media debate, and that's all we need. We just need people to listen. I think convincing them is the easy bit. It's getting the audience and getting the platform to communicate. And if you've got people elected with that mission, then I think that's a big step forward in that regard.
Well, if I could add one advance to it, you mentioned William Wilberforce. I entirely agree with what you say. You can't change public policy until you change public opinion. But Wilberforce had a counterpart outside of Parliament, the lesser known Thomas Clarkson.
Yeah.
And this man was Cambridge grad who used to go up and down the country collecting information on slavery. He would gather together the names of all the British sailors who died as part of the slave trade. He would come around with the shackles and the thumb screws used to suppress slaves on the ships. He would have etchings of books. He vividly made a case to the brutality of slavery. He took that which was hidden and he took it and he blew it up all around the UK. And then you've got Equiano, publishing his testimony, of which Thomas Clarkson was, hugely responsible. But what you had is a wonderful partnership between those who were contesting in the public square and then a man who could represent them politically. And when those two come together, so you mentioned earlier, we have to work within the political system. It's a half truth. You need people to be really pushing this in the public, almost as a non or cross political issue. And then you have people on the inside who are willing to take it further, willing to get the names and the stories, and Sharon, in the estate who took these pills during lockdown, and it got really nasty and it got really complicated. Well, let's get Sharon in to speak to, our inquiry. And it's that kind of partnership that is so needed to bring about change. What's really remarkable, not many people know this, is although the legislative battle to end the slave trade took about 40 years, public opinion on slavery shifted in about a 4-year period in the 1780s. And that's because enough information was out in the public domain. You had wonderful, activists, mainly females in the Bristol area, lampooning everyone who took sugar in their tea, and it became such an issue that people suddenly had enough, and then the fight became, how to eradicate, this systematic racism and injustice, from that the English had established. But it's that, it's the changing of public opinion where the battle is won and lost. And so my strong encouragement to you would be, before you get in, keep educating on this in the public domain. Come visit our website, subscribe with us. We can connect you with other people in your area who want to do the same thing, because we've got a database on that. And secondly, when you do get into Parliament, as you vividly put earlier, Richard, don't subscribe to that that blob, but actually keep yourself rooted to the people on the outside, gathering the facts, making the case, because really in that partnership comes all the change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an argument waiting to be won.
We say it well.
I think that's definitely the case. Right, have you got any other areas you wanted to touch on, or have you?
No. Yeah, I mean, you've got the slides, so I guess insert them at will.
Do that.
We're not a Christian organization, although many of us in our organization are Christian, and we strongly believe that prayer is essential to seeing any significant change in any place, be it in your own heart or marriage even. And so my encouragement to you as an individual, especially if you're struck by this, is for your activism to start from that place, of humbly acknowledging what's been going on in our world, before a God that deeply cares. So that would be my final point to you. But thank you so much for listening. It's been a real pleasure.
No, I really appreciate it.
Richard.
Really appreciated what you brought. There's a lot of new ideas there, and I'm sure people will find that very helpful. So till next time, keep up your good work, and who knows, maybe we'll see you again in maybe the conference in the future, or maybe online.
You let me know, Richard. You let me know if you want to be at Wilberforce. I'm happy to be your Clarkson.
Right, thanks, Christian.
Bless you.
Bye bye.